There are moments in this journey where something shifts and you can feel it. A conversation that doesn't sit right. A wave of tension that comes out of nowhere. Angry thoughts that start spiraling in your mind faster than you can catch them. And suddenly, you're not just dealing with pain. You're dealing with confusion, frustration, and maybe a sense of being pulled off course. If you've recently had an interaction and wondered, why did that hit me so hard? Or why does this feel heavier than it should? There may be more going on than what you see, because estrangement isn't just emotional. It's not just relational. It is spiritual. And once you recognize what's really going on, everything starts to make more sense. So today we're talking about what it really means for estrangement to be a spiritual battle and how you can begin recognizing when you're under spiritual attack so that you can respond differently. So grab your coffee, get somewhere quiet if you can, and let's dive in. Hi friends, welcome to the Praying Moms of Estranged Children podcast. Are you struggling with strained relationships and losses that have shaken your faith and left you wondering where God is? If you long for peace, a deeper prayer life, and faith that holds steady, you're in the right place. I'm Sarah, a wife, mom of adult kids, and your Jesus-loving friend. Here you'll find encouragement to help you trust God and practical tools to pray with confidence as you walk closely with Him. So turn off your alarm clock, pour a strong latte, and find peace as you trust God with your children and your broken relationships. Today's review comes from Brooklyn. She says, "This was the message I didn't know I needed to hear today. I was so encouraged by Sarah's words in a season when I started to lose hope. These episodes lift me up and empower me to change what I can, while still having faith that God is in control." Encourage a friend by sharing this episode with her, and don't forget to follow or like this show so that you don't miss a single episode. Hi friends, I was recently hit with a major spiritual attack, and I'm not talking about a small one either. I'm telling you that if you don't believe that spiritual warfare is a real thing, just start doing some things for God. Just start using your voice to help other people heal. Just start sharing scripture. Start encouraging people to pray, and the spiritual attacks will come out of nowhere. They will come out of people that you would never suspect. And that's exactly what happened to me. Now, I have dealt with many spiritual attacks. I'm used to praying through those and surrounding myself with other women of prayer who will stand beside me and lift me up in their prayers and agree with me in my prayers. I have a worship music playlist that I turn on whenever I'm feeling discouraged or attacked, and it often helps me feel better. I have a wonderful husband who will pray for me and with me. All of those tools, along with reading scripture, which I do regularly, are very helpful. I don't want to discount those things because they're super important. But sometimes you will be attacked out of the blue when you are not expecting it by people who you always thought would have your back, people who are close to you. Sometimes these people will give you or your estranged child unsolicited advice because they know you have a troubled relationship and they think that they have all the answers, or at least some solutions that you haven't tried yet. They don't realize the whole story. They don't know the issues that are at play, and they certainly don't know your history to the level of detail that you do. I'm not going to go into great detail here about the situation because I want to keep some people in my life confidential. But I will say that 2 of the 3 people who the enemy used to attack me last week didn't even realize that they had done or said anything that was harmful or detrimental. I had to bring it to their attention. All of us who are estranged from our children know that that relationship is tremendously fragile. But sometimes our family members don't realize just how fragile it is. And they can either be a help or a hindrance in our reconnection efforts, but they often don't realize that. But here is why it was a spiritual attack. It was a spiritual attack because when I found out what they had been saying, and I knew how damaging it was, I was very angry. Anger is a normal emotion. It's an emotion sometimes that we need to have because it tells us that something is wrong. But what follows after that anger is the temptation to be bitter and to be unforgiving and to hold grudges. And I was really tempted to do all of those things. I was tempted to block communication with these two people. I was tempted to say all kinds of things to these two people. And I did say quite a few things to one of them to try to help her understand that her advice was not helpful at all, but actually very harmful. But I restrained myself from saying other things that were on my mind that I could have said to her. You see, the words you speak with your mouth are so important, and we can speak blessings or we can speak curses. And we have that choice even when we are in the heat of the moment of being angry about something. Now, I don't know what the heart motivation was for these two people when they said these things. Only God knows that, and that's between them and God. It's not for me to judge that. I was so upset, though, by their lack of understanding of how much I have prayed for my estranged child, how much I have given to that relationship, how much I have tried to reconnect, how many hours, hundreds of hours that I have spent working on myself, and they don't understand that investment or that their careless words had a big impact. We have to make some choices in those difficult moments. I could have chosen to be bitter and to be unforgiving and to distance myself from them. And I'm not saying there's never a time to distance yourself from someone, but if you are distancing yourself from someone, you have to also ask yourself really honestly, are you distancing yourself because of unforgiveness or bitterness in your heart? Because if those are the reasons, then you can be sure that is not God's will, because He tells us to forgive 70 times 7. Making the connection between what we feel and what we believe is important, because estrangement isn't just emotional, it's also spiritual. So I wanted to share this personal story with you as an example of how estrangement is a spiritual battle that often brings a series of spiritual attacks for us to deal with along the way. We have to be on our guard because there are so many temptations for us to say things or act in ways according to the flesh, in ways that open up the door to the enemy. And whenever you're going through a difficult season like estrangement, you are just more vulnerable to more of the enemy's attacks. Now, just to be clear on who I'm talking about when I say the enemy, I am talking about the enemy of our souls, which is Satan. In John 10:10, Jesus tells us the thief comes only in order to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But I came so that they may have life and life abundantly. The reason you're more vulnerable to the enemy's attacks during estrangement is because your faith has already been shaken. You have already questioned God's goodness because your child isn't in your life anymore, at least for now. And you've probably experienced shame from other people who have misconceptions about estrangement, who have never experienced it themselves. You might have even lost other family members, leaving you feeling even more isolated. And the enemy wants you to be isolated because if he can isolate you, then he can discourage you even more than you already are and try to pull you away from the Lord. Ephesians 6:12 tells us, "For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of this unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places." We are not fighting against our estranged children or other family members. Satan will try to use your estrangement situation to pull you away from God. That's because he is the enemy of our souls, and he has been fighting against God's design for the family since the beginning of time. He's been waging war against marriages, against healthy family relationships since Adam and Eve and their children were born. In fact, in the Bible, as early as Genesis chapter 2, God warned Adam not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then in Genesis 3, the very next chapter, immediately Satan tried to pit Eve against Adam by tempting her to question whether God really said that she must not eat from the tree. This caused the very first estrangement, the very first broken relationship between mankind and God. Ever since then, humanity has been dealing with pain, sin, struggle, and estrangement on earth. In fact, in the very next chapter, we learn that Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain became angry and he murdered his own brother Abel. As we continue reading in the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, we go on to find out that Jacob leaves his family home and becomes estranged from his parents and his brother Esau for about 20 years before they reconciled. Then we learn about Joseph and his brothers becoming estranged, and they reconnected many years later. Then there was King David and his son Absalom, a very rebellious son. They were estranged for 2 years. So these attacks on the family are not new. Estrangement is one of the enemy's oldest tricks. But God has been pursuing reconciliation since the very beginning. In Luke 15, we read the story of the prodigal son. It's the story of a son who demands an early inheritance from his father. He leaves home and then he squanders the money in this wild, lavish living for quite a while. We don't know exactly how long, but eventually he's humbled by how hard life is. And the scriptures tell us that when he came to his senses, he made the decision to return home with a contrite heart. His father was watching and waiting, and when he saw his son from a long way off, he ran to meet his son and they embraced. The wonderful news is that Jesus' death put an end to estrangement between people and God. For all who come to him in faith can have a relationship with God. So let's talk about what this means for you. A battle consists of a series of attacks. Soldiers have to defend themselves against many incoming attacks, and they have to fight back. The army or the soldiers who are standing firm at the end of the battle, who do not retreat, win the battle. So if estrangement is a spiritual battle, then you have to start recognizing when you're dealing with an attack or a fiery arrow, as it's called in the book of Ephesians. Ephesians 6:16 tells us to hold up the shield of faith to stop the fiery arrows of the devil. If we don't recognize the attack for what it is, we can't respond to it in the right way. Here's the thing, spiritual attacks don't always look dramatic. They don't announce themselves. Sometimes they are very subtle. They can look like a conversation that leaves you feeling unsettled, causing you to fear. Sometimes they're thoughts of doubts that keep replaying in your mind that you start believing. And other times they feel like a shift in your emotions that feels stronger than the situation warrants, so you lash out in anger or in some other way that you know is wrong. Ephesians 4 tells us, don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you are still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. That verse tells us that we can give a foothold to the devil by being angry and in other ways. That's one example of one sin that gives him a foothold in our lives. Giving him a foothold means opening up access to him to operate in our lives. If you really want to navigate spiritual warfare in a healthy, God-centered way, the kind that actually leads to victory, there's something important you need to pay attention to. You have to be aware of the doors that are open in your life. Here's a simple way that helps me understand what an open door is. It isn't always something obvious. It might be consistent to semi-consistent sin. It could look like unforgiveness that you've been carrying for a long time towards someone. It might be unbelief, struggling to believe God. It might be pride that you haven't noticed in yourself. This part really requires honesty because we all have areas that we tend to fall back into when we're stressed, and we all have certain patterns that feel familiar, even if they're not healthy. Often, those are the ones that we rationalize the most. They're the ones we don't want to look at too closely. Those are the places where the enemy likes to operate. What is your go-to sin? The one you tend to fall into when you're stressed? What are those sins that you rationalize? Those are the ones that should concern us the most because we overlook them since they're the ones we tend to lean on. They're the ones we least like to think about, the ones we justify, the ones we least want to let go of because we're used to them. So what are the places in your life where the devil might have a foothold? Is it worth holding on to unforgiveness if it's keeping a door open that allows the enemy to keep stirring up pain in your life? If we want the Holy Spirit to move freely in our lives, we have to be willing to let him come in and gently deal with the things that are getting in the way. Now, of course, not every problem is caused by Satan. We cause a lot of our own problems, and I don't want to give you the impression that everything is caused by the enemy. I don't believe that. And we also don't want to give him more credit or spend a lot of time focusing on him, because our focus is supposed to be on Jesus. The devil is just the enemy of God, and God is much more powerful. But we do need to be cognizant of what our weaknesses are, and we do need to be aware when we're being attacked. In 2 Corinthians 2, Paul, writing to the church, was talking about forgiving people. And he said in verse 10, "Anyone you forgive, I also forgive. And what I have forgiven, if there was anything to forgive, I have forgiven in the sight of Christ for your sake, in order that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes." We know from reading the book of Job that Satan studied Job's life to see how he could attack Job in certain ways. He knew Job's children were so important to him that Job prayed for them regularly. So Satan took out his children. The enemy studies your patterns too. There are certain ways that you'll be attacked that I won't be, because we have different weaknesses. So understanding your tendencies and recognizing your vulnerabilities is crucial for defense. So let me give you a few ways to recognize when something might be more than just a hard moment that you're dealing with, when it might mean that you're actually dealing with a spiritual attack. So you have to be careful about how you respond. One sign is sudden division in relationships. Maybe things were going along just fine or at least manageable, and then all of a sudden there's this thick tension, a misunderstanding, or a conflict that feels much bigger than it should. That's a sign that your relationship is under attack. Another sign is intense emotional reactions, not just feeling hurt or frustrated, but feeling overwhelmed with anger or maybe with bitterness or that deep sense of hopelessness to the point where it's hard to think clearly. God is not the author of confusion, so you know that's not from him. Another one is wanting to isolate yourself, even though God created us to be in community with others. You start pulling back from people, even those who normally support you, and you feel like no one understands. Another sign is the urge to react in ungodly ways according to your fleshly nature, saying unkind things that you won't be able to take back, withholding forgiveness, and holding on to resentment. That's exactly what the enemy wants, because if he can get you to react out of pain instead of from a place of spiritual stability, he can create even more damage to you and your relationships. And I want to be clear that this doesn't mean the people involved in your spiritual attacks are the enemy. They're not. But the enemy can use situations, misunderstandings, and even well-meaning people to create division, discouragement, doubt, and distance. So the goal here isn't to become suspicious of everyone, and it really isn't to give the devil free rental space in your mind by thinking about him all the time. The goal instead is to become aware of what's happening spiritually when you're feeling out of sorts and where the enemy is trying to gain a foothold in your life so that you can protect yourself. 1 Peter 5 verses 8 and 9 tell us to stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Remember that your family of believers all over the world is going through the same kind of suffering you are. What you're walking through right now with estrangement is not random. And it's not something that you're meant to navigate in your own strength. There is a spiritual layer to this. There's a real battle happening. And when you begin to recognize that, you stop feeling so confused by what's happening around you and inside of you. And instead of immediately reacting, you begin to pause. That's when you can really begin to discern what's really going on. You can begin to recognize This might not just be a hard situation. This might actually be a spiritual attack in which I'm being tempted to say or do something that opens a door that should not be opened. And that awareness matters because it changes everything about how you respond. We're out of time here, so in the next episode, I'm going to talk about what you should actually do when you recognize that you're in a spiritual battle. Because, friends, God does not want us to stay defeated. He equips us to fight the spiritual battles that come our way. So for now, practice being aware of how you're being tempted to sin, how you're being provoked, how you're thinking about things. Stay grounded in truth and stay connected to the Lord, no matter what life brings you this week. Friend, if you feel like you're going through a spiritual battle and you just can't find the peace or you're not sure how to pray through it, I encourage you to book a peaceful parenting call with me. You can go to the link in the episode show notes and I would be happy to help you work through it. Hey, I hope today's episode inspired you. If so, would you click the follow button for the show and share it with someone who wants to learn more about trusting God? Also, please take 30 seconds to leave me a quick review of the show on Apple Podcasts. It means so much to me to know this podcast is encouraging you. Set your alarm to wake up to Jesus in your mocha and meet me here every Tuesday for a new episode. See you soon.